Welcome to Human Monsters. This episode details the ways in which mentally ill people can become victims of institutional neglect and cruelty. Part 1. This is a clip from Geraldo Rivera's expose on Willowbrook State School.
Good evening, I'm Bill Butel. The special report that follows is a story that started back in January of 1972, when Geraldo Rivera and other reporters from other television stations and newspapers first discovered the dismal quality of the care and treatment this state provides for its mentally retarded people. The special report tells the story of the changes that have been made since 1972 and of the changes that have still to be made. The French have an expression, plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose. The more things change, the more they stay the same. And never has the expression been more appropriate than it is now. This is the Willowbrook case. Geraldo Rivera reporting.
This building in Brooklyn houses the Eastern District Federal Courthouse. And this room on the 6th floor for the last several months has echoed with the frightening recital of horrors. Federal Judge Orrin Judd has been hearing testimony on the case against the New York State Department of Mental Hygiene. To the people who've given testimony in this courtroom, this unprecedented federal lawsuit is known simply as the Willowbrook case, because it specifically concerns that warehouse of human misery on Staten Island. This court is hearing the story for the first time, but it's an old story, and a story that goes even beyond the locked wards at Willowbrook and beyond the case that's being argued here. And tonight we tell that larger story, our version of the Willowbrook case, the people against the state of New York. Robert Kennedy went to Willowbrook in 1965, almost 10 years ago. He found a snake pit and he demanded change, but there would be no change. We submit what he found as our Exhibit A, our first piece of evidence in the case against the state of New York.
I visited the state institutions for the mentally retarded, and I think particularly at Willowbrook that we have a situation that borders on a snake pit, and that the children live in filth. But many of our fellow citizens are suffering tremendously because lack of attention, lack of imagination, lack of adequate manpower.
In 1972, we went to Willowbrook for the first time. These are the conditions we found. This is our Exhibit B. The first building we went into was number 6, the B ward, and I was totally unprepared for what we found there. In the large bare room, there was one attendant and perhaps 50 or 60 seriously and profoundly retarded young boys. Many of them were naked, some were smeared with their own feces, all were just rocking back and forth or smashing their heads against the floor and walls. This institution in 1972 was a crime against humanity. Those aren't just words, they accurately reflect the reality of Willowbrook. It was a horrible place that New York State officials could neither defend nor explain away. Since that time, however, some significant improvements have been implemented, and this documentary, among other things, is a follow-up on what has or has not been done. Willowbrook, as it was in November of this year, is our Exhibit C in this case against the state. Under the crushing pressure of public outrage, the Department of Mental Hygiene increased the institution's budget and added 300 staff people. It also took action to decrease the number of residents at Willowbrook, reducing the total population from 5 to about 3,000. But despite these improvements, the expert witnesses in the federal lawsuit testified that conditions for people who remained at the institution were as bad and in some cases were worse than they had been before the initial newspaper and television exposés, a fact indicative of either supreme incompetence or grossly misplaced priorities on the part of state officials. Under the heading of Exhibit D, we present some of the specific evidence of insufficient change. It deals mostly with the physical abuse or neglect of the residents, but is not meant as a reflection on the employees at the institution, most of whom are dedicated, underpaid, and working under impossible conditions. There have been several complaints from parents of apparently battered children.
How much more can he take? He can't speak to himself. I have to talk for him.
In October, an 18-year-old resident of Building 8 was found lying in a pool of blood next to his bed. Nobody saw what happened to him, but the night attendant quickly called for a doctor. At night, there's only one doctor on duty to care for all 3,000 residents. According to witnesses, it took the doctor 20 minutes to get from Building 2 to Building 8, a distance of about 200 yards. By that time, the resident was dead. This summer, another retarded child broke a leg. He was taken from Willowbrook to the public service hospital on Staten Island, where a cast was put on. The child was then taken back to this ward at Willowbrook to recuperate. When he was returned to the public health hospital to have the cast removed 3 months later, the nurses there were horrified to discover that the cast had been rotted by the boy's own urine. When the cast was finally removed, it was found to be infested with maggots.
By the time the maggots were found, it was too late because we did not get any answer from the public health hospital as to what to be done, and we immediately had them removed. But we certainly do admit that it should have been corrected, yes.
There are no screens on the windows of Willowbrook's hospital ward, so the limbs of crippled children are inviting resting and feeding grounds for flies. And open sores like this one, not really explained, have been seen too frequently in this place. I said earlier that about 2,000 residents had been taken out of Willowbrook. Good news, but where have they gone? While some have been placed in wonderful community facilities like those run by Catholic Charities and the Association for Retarded Children, the majority have just been shifted to other substandard institutions. Operation Exodus, the program to reduce the population of Willowbrook, is a failure because many of the former residents, like those taken here to Keener on Ward's Island, are worse off now than they were before they left Willowbrook. The Department of Mental Hygiene has the responsibility for caring also for the state's mentally ill as well as its retarded, and the department's record in this area leaves just as much to be desired. Pilgrim State is the world's largest institution devoted to the care of the mentally ill. Located out in Suffolk County, the complex of buildings is enormous. The wards are fairly clean now, but they're also depressingly familiar. They're filled with men and women doing nothing, going nowhere, waiting for nothing to happen. During the mid-'60s, Pilgrim State, along with Kings Park, Central Islip, and other state institutions for the mentally ill, were the target of scandal and expose. They were branded human warehouses that were totally unresponsive, failing to provide either decent living conditions or rehabilitation for their residents. The critics said that the best way to care for the mentally handicapped was outside these big institutions and in the community. The state responded to the criticism with panic. They started almost indiscriminately to discharge patients. So many were set free that it permitted state officials to close down entire buildings, not only at Pilgrim State, but at Kings Park and at Central Islip as well. There are now dozens of structurally sound abandoned buildings on Department of Mental Hygiene property. This is Pilgrim State Hospital, and it's too bad it isn't Halloween because this is absolutely the spookiest place I've ever been. Behind me is what must have been one of the biggest buildings ever built on Long Island. It was put up in the early 40s. Actually, this place is like a little town. The big central building in the middle, the little church in the foreground, and lots of smaller buildings, satellites actually, to every side of it. All of them are empty. It's eerie here. It's like a ghost town. You wonder where all the people went. The answer to that question is our Exhibit H. It's called dumping. This is Main Street in the town of Bayshore, Long Island. Until recently, this was a pleasant, quiet suburban community. Its misfortune, though, is that it's located within a few miles of the big institutions. Because, as you can see, shuffling along the street at every hour of the day or night, improperly dressed, unsupervised, and uncared for, are dozens and dozens of former mental patients. In an indefensible perversion of the concept of community care, the state just put these people out, with little or no preparation, with little or no provision for aftercare or supervision or psychiatric follow-up. They were dumped out on the streets. A whole new business was created by the emptying of the institutions for the mentally ill, providing housing for former residents. Some of the community facilities are decent and well-maintained. Most are not. The dismal Baybright Hotel, where a majority of the residents are former mental patients, is an example. Until October, there were no rehabilitative programs here at all, and now they're only minimal. 2 men share 1 room. I asked the hotel manager about it. Lance, what rent does he pay here?
Pete pays $125 per month.
And the other roommate also $125.
Right.
So that means for this room they pay $250 a month.
Yes.
Don't you think that's high for a room that's maybe, what is this, 8 by 10 and 2 people, $250 a month? And that's without food, right?
That is without food, right? That's room by itself.
With $250 a month, they could live in a whole house. Don't you think that's kind of high?
No, I don't. That's the going rate.
In Wyandanch, also in Suffolk County, there's a rundown frame house that's been rented to 3 former mental patients. It demonstrates how badly the state has failed in the area of community care. This slum is owned and operated by an employee of the Department of Mental Hygiene, a residential therapist at Pilgrim State. The 3 residents of this house, all of whom were discharged from Pilgrim State, are charged a total of $420 a month rent for the privilege of living here. My guide was Richard Balland, a social worker.
The health department was notified, and they did contact the landlord, Mr. Powell. So he seems to be making some slight attempts, but the place, you can see, is still disgusting. And I'm aware of the fact that Mr. Powell is pulling in some $420 a month rent for this place, every 28 days, that is.
Mr. Powell was given the opportunity to come on and give his side of the story, but he chose not to. Long Beach in Nassau County is another community that suffered as a result of dumping. It used to be an attractive beachside resort, but the city had the misfortune of having an excess of hotels with empty rooms in the off-season. Enterprising owners got together with state officials, and large numbers of former mental patients were shuttled in. One of the largest hotels on the boardwalk is the Promenade, where the normal elderly with their very different needs are now housed side by side with the mentally handicapped. My tour guide was Long Beach resident Joe French.
The problem is that they're here, and you can see they just sit. There's no programs for their entertainment, for their diet, for their care, for their well-being, dress. And that's the thing the people in Long Beach are concerned about, is that it may have been a great program to turn people loose out of these big institutions, but they just moved them from one institution to another where they get less care than they got in the institution that they were first in.
Do you want to tell me the story of the mental patient who was found dead after, well, I guess an extended period of time?
Yeah, I guess what happened is that 7th floor, the top floor of the hotel, was closed off and not used anymore, and all of the elevators don't run there except there is one that runs to that floor. She must have wandered onto that elevator, went to the top floor, and no one ever goes up there, and then we don't know what happened, how she died, but she died up there, and she laid there for several months. No one went up there, so no one found it until some workmen happened to go up there one day.
I spoke with 2 residents of another establishment catering primarily to released mental patients, the Miami Hotel. Do they take care of you now?
No.
They don't do anything
Nothing
worse.
happened.
They're doing anything worse.
They don't come and help you out or take care of you?
No, they don't help us. They don't do anything worse. The truth, they don't do anything worse.
Well, there's a feeling of indignation at the State Department of Mental Hygiene at its poorly developed and improperly conceived program of releasing mental patients. It's thrust large numbers of people into Long Beach without proper aftercare. It's placed an undue burden on the community, and it's certainly totally unfair to the former patients themselves.
The Upper West Side of Manhattan is another area with more than its share of dumped mental patients, and again, there's a logical reason. In this case, it's the proliferation of sleazy single-room occupancy hotels, perhaps the sleaziest of which is the West Side Towers on Broadway, where living conditions like this are common. The occupant of this room, a released mental patient, ran in fear when we knocked on his door.
There's a person lives in this room.
Dr. Henry Brill of the Department of Mental Hygiene responds.
The operation has not been fully successful. With hindsight, it's apparent now that we could have done it differently. Under the pressures that existed at the time, legal pressures, that is the pressure of laws, regulations, public opinion, professional enthusiasm, I'm not sure that how it could have been done differently, but if I had it to do over again, I would feel that we could have done it differently.
Most people getting out of mental institutions need welfare benefits to survive. That's an unavoidable fact of life. The big political question, though, is who pays the welfare bill? The original county of residence, or the county the former mental patient moves into after he or she is released from an institution? This internal memorandum and others obtained for us by the independent study group from the records of the Department of Mental Hygiene are clear and to us convincing evidence that under pressure from Suffolk County officials who are angry of the dumping of residents into towns like Bay Shore, the department unlawfully contrived to prevent patients released in Suffolk from getting assistance from that county.
Part 2. This is a documentary by NYS Council on Developmental Disabilities, which contains an interview by Geraldo Rivera, where he, among others, reflect on the conditions of Willowbrook State School.
Well, I visited the state institutions for the mentally retarded, and I think particularly at Willowbrook that we have a situation that borders on a snake pit, and that the children live in filth. I think all of us are at fault, and I think it's just it's long overdue that something be done about it.
How long have you been at Willowbrook?
18 years.
How is it living on the ward that you live?
Disgrace.
The attendants are trying their best, but the staff is just too small to do anything more than just try and keep the place clean. When there's only one person to take care of 30 or 40, nothing good can possibly happen. No rehabilitation, no training, nothing. The attendants are as much the victim of the conditions here as the patients are.
My problem with telling the story 50 years later is that I'm like Pavlov's dog. I react and I get flashed back to that, to the obscene, the torture of the residents, the inmates there. It was something so utterly terrible that it was almost unbelievable.
This was a secret enclave. The system had set up a way that would not allow any ordinary people to see what was going on inside these brick buildings.
I was given this key on that first day of work. Pretty heavy steel key that you can see. I was told to go to a certain building, and I went there and I opened one door. It was a very heavy metal door. Turned the key, opened it, and I walked a couple of steps and I had to open a second door. I was directed down to the end of the hall. There was another steel door. At 19 years of age, I basically said to myself, what have I gotten myself into? Who is locked behind 3 steel doors? Pushed the door open, and when I walked in, on the other side of the door were 40 toddlers. And why in God's name were they locked behind 3 steel doors?
When I applied for my job, I was really never taken to any of the wards. They just accepted my application, and they told me when I would start. And then I went to Building 6, which was my building, and the building supervisor opened the door to the day room, and there was the chaos.
You have no idea what was inside, no idea the savagery, the squalor, the illness, the infectiousness, the violence that was just the norm every day.
It had a stink to it that got into your clothes and into your skin. How unattended. It was hell on earth.
Why would you continue to allow people to share bathrooms with no doors on the stalls when you know 100% of them get hepatitis within 6 months of entering, and when the incidence of intestinal parasites and worms was incredibly high?
When I used to give out cookies and candy, I used to throw it on the floor, and they all get down and grab it. And I never told nobody that. It happened. It happened.
Mind you, this is only 50 years ago. We're not talking about the dark ages. We are still responsible. We're not talking about great-grandparents and, ancient history. This is our world, our universe. This happened in our universe on our watch. It's mind-blowing.
Well, Willowbrook has a long history, obviously, on this site. It actually was first chartered 75 years ago, and in the charter it was described as a school for the education of what they then termed mental defectives, what we now would say probably would be people with intellectual or developmental disabilities. So it started out with this goal of educating and training people, and much of the coverage that you might see in the newspapers then was designed to encourage people to see this as a good option for their children. But very quickly, through underfunding and understaffing, it became really quite unlivable. At its height, it had about 3 times as many people living in its wards as the place was designed to accommodate.
I would get calls, for example, at the beginning that say to me, somebody's acting out. You need to sign a straitjacket order. You need to sign a Thorazine shot to cool them down. And I didn't understand what was going on here at first. Really, it took me a year to really see and figure out the evil, the relentless cruelty that was built into this system to maintain the status quo.
Lack of privacy, and that many of the people were, at that time, because of the budget cuts, there weren't enough changes of clothing to go around, so there was nudity, chaos.
Nobody came into these buildings. Not the director of this place. Nobody came into those buildings. They were sealed off, as coffins. They were living coffins for devalued people.
I am the younger sister of a previous resident of Willowbrook who lived here for 10 years before he died in 1968. He actually became a bit of a family secret. I was told that I didn't visit because I didn't want to go at the age of 3. I believe my mother never went because it was too painful. Doctors, social workers, and the belief at that time was, in a situation like this, your best bet is to drop your child off and they will get cared for and to move on with your life. And that is what my parents tried to do. My mother never, ever forgave herself. Ever.
When you worked here, if you continued to work here, you had to become a little bit impervious. You had to be able to deal with this. I always say that we became a little bit institutionalized because this was such a surreal thing. But if I left, who's going to come? I mean, I felt I could do something. Maybe I could change what was happening on a daily basis.
My brother died on July 4th, 1968. I was always under the impression that his death was due to some type of trauma. What I was told subsequently was that he had perforated his stomach, and the assumption was based upon what I had learned in secrecy by reading, bits and pieces, was that he probably had been either abused by caregivers or that there had been some kind of traumatic event, with another resident.
I was just a year older than my brother, Louis Rivera, who was placed in Willowbrook State School at the age of 5. My mother would undress my brother as a way of assessing, was he gaining weight? Were there any bruises? Were there any marks? That's how families tried to monitor the care, because we weren't allowed to ask any questions.
My little girl was 2 years old, and we never knew where the children slept or who fed them. The first visit, I had to cut her hair because it was matted. The director sent me a letter and told me if I didn't like it, they'd take her out. So I got on the bus that next day. I came out to Willowbrook. I sat there all day long until about 4 o'clock. Secretary said, "We're closing now. You got to leave." I said, "I'm not going in the place." And finally, he decided to meet with me. He didn't even look up at me. I said, "Well, get someone to take the letter. I'll sign it. I'll take her out." I said, "Before I take her out, I'm going to call the news media." And that's when he asked me, did I want a cup of coffee?
That's the beginnings of advocacy.
Before Geraldo Rivera's expose, there was a young reporter, Jane Curtin, who went to Willowbrook and actually did a series of articles exposing the conditions. She was joined by Eric Artz, who was a photojournalist who took some powerful photographs of the horrific conditions there. So Jane really was the first to really bring public awareness to what was happening at Willowbrook.
I got to know then Mike Wilkins and Bill Bronston. They contacted me and told me that there was something that I should see, that they thought that I would be able to write about it. And they had faith, I think, in my perspective on things. They walked me through the front door. I mean, I was with people who were taking chances, but there had been no prior exposure, so there were no alarm bells. So it was just three people going through the front door.
Nobody really believed it. When Jane Curtin did her articles in the Staten Island Advance, there were a couple of still photos, but still nobody believed it, and we were being denounced from pulpits and other politicians not believing us, and they were thinking we were just radicals bad-mouthing an institution that was doing its best.
The first thing I began to do was to bring the families inside to show them why their kids were being destroyed, why every time they come, their kid would be more and more damaged, more and more injured.
Bill Frost and I quickly observed and concluded that the most progressive element in that institution was the parents.
That led to meetings where I began to set up seminars for the families in order to understand why they had to get their kids out of here.
The parents got involved, they got organized, they got confident because their meetings were really big. We had a meeting of one Sunday with a large group of parents. The director, Dr. Jack Hammond, was invited. He was asked to take a public stand against the conditions where there weren't enough clothes, there wasn't enough staff. He refused. He said, "I've been in this business for a long time and it won't work." They ejected him from the meeting at that point. That was a Sunday, and that following Monday, there was a memorandum circulated through the institution saying that no employee was allowed to attend a meeting of the parents' organization. But the next Sunday, I did attend, and so did Bill. And then we were promptly given our pink slips.
The supervisor in Building 6, a nice guy, but it was his job to hand me my pink slip and tell me I was fired, and I was pretty stunned. And his hand was shaking, and in his anxiety, he forgot to ask for the key. And I didn't remember that I had it. So I got home, and there it was. And so, of course, it made me think, because one of my thoughts was, man, if people just knew, if they just knew about this place and could see it for themselves, nobody would put up with it. And so I slept on it, and the next day I called Geraldo, who I happen to know him from before.
Well, Mike called me at one point and said that he had just been fired from Willowbrook. And I said, "What's Willowbrook?" It sounded so nice, that lyrical name, the Willowbrook. I thought it was like a country club. He said he had just been fired and that the conditions there were so appalling that he thought it would be a great story for us to tell. And I listened. I had no experience at all with either institutions or with the developmentally disabled. So I was utterly unprepared for the reality of Willowbrook. I was horrified. I was appalled. It was beyond belief how horrible it was, how filthy it was. It was hell on earth. It was really. I was an experienced person, very urban, very savvy, did all kinds of, drug abuse stories, and, I was a tough guy. But when I saw Willowbrook, it was something that seared my soul. The administrators had a colder, academic, excusing in a way as thinking that we were naive, that there was something that we were missing. And I think that my ignorance was my strength, in the sense that I looked at it and said, "Are you kidding me? I mean, you have children unattended and smeared with their own feces and wailing under the sinks, their pants down around their ankles, eating slop. I mean, what is it that I don't understand?
The conditions are getting worse every time they cut the budget more and more.
I got back to the eyewitness newsroom, and there were a barrage of calls from New York State officials angrily denouncing our trespassing and threatening lawsuits, and without authorization violated the privacy of the residents.
But there's no privacy anyway.
There was no privacy anyway, very eloquently stated. They lived, everything, all communal. So to his credit, Al Primo, the director of Eyewitness News, and the assignment editors said, okay, they suspended judgment. The film came back from the lab. They saw the film. Everyone's spine stiffened, and they said, we're going to go with this story. It changed the world.
But even Bernard, with his tragically eloquent plea for help, doesn't really understand that what Willowbrook needs isn't more money. More money would certainly help. At least the kids would have clothes and they'd be cleaner than they are now, but they'd still basically be human vegetables in a detention camp. What we need is a new approach. We have to change the way we care for our mentally retarded. We ask for change, we demand change.
The question was, what was the solution to this place? They wanted to fix it, of course. They wanted to pour another few millions of dollars into this place because they didn't have another alternative paradigm in their head. And our job was to stop them from fixing this place and to shut it down. We went into the federal court in order to try and get an emergency intervention. The lawyers brought in the top leaders in the United States to talk about what quality services for people with special needs look like. Their testimony was just amazing. It was the first time that the reality of habilitation services, of individualized developmental services, was articulated in a court situation. And so as the trial went on, finally, the judge decided to get up off of his bench and come and take a look. And that closed the deal. Once he saw it, once he walked through it, no matter what they did to clean it up. And they tried to clean it up.
The expose really led to major changes in the disability system in this country, and various laws were passed which were designed to protect people with disabilities. In 1975 alone, 3 significant laws were enacted, leading up to the passage of the Civil Rights for Institutionalized Persons Act, which protects the rights of people with disabilities in institutional facilities, followed by the official closure of Willowbrook in 1987, paving the way for the Americans with Disabilities Act in 1990.
Did I take you back into Willowbrook?
I never went back.
You never went back, yeah. I wish that I never did.
So after Bernard left Willowbrook, he went on to become a civil rights activist for people with developmental disabilities, and really was a driving force behind the creation of the statewide Self-Advocacy Association of New York State, or SANES as it's called. So he went on to do some great things after he left Willowbrook.
We're not there yet, but we're getting there with all the advocacy, parents advocacy, self-advocates, SANES, and because of Bernard Campbell, it's all started because of him, and we're grateful.
You know, we got a long way to go. This is going to go on forever until we change our attitude about people with developmental disabilities.
Bernard he went on to have a career in advocacy. Where would he have been if he'd never met Wilkins and Bronson? He became a symbol of a potential realized.
Willowbrook affected the entire world. It is the ground zero for disability rights.
What I saw in my brother was a desire to live, a desire to experience the world as we know it, that was deprived and denied of him by virtue of the institutionalization that he was subject to.
I think it's also important to remember that there were probably thousands of children who never survived being here, and they need to be remembered too.
The cost is a human cost, and being robbed of that potential in one's life is just a tragedy we would never want to see repeated again.
There's no way to go ahead without remembering what happened in the past, because it gives us direction. It tells us we have learned this lesson. There's a duality for me with Willowbrook. I think back about some of the saddest things that I saw here, and then I think about the fact that this little boy, Josh, that learned to walk when he was 8 only because there was no one helping him, that he took his first steps to me. And when you grow up in an institution, we stunt that curiosity. So I think about the sadness of it, but I think about Josh walking towards me and how that filled me.
Those images that we saw in Geraldo Rivera's expose, or in the photographs by Eric Arts that appeared in the Staten Island Advance, the images that make us hurt, that's not that whole person. That is that person in that historical moment. It's important to remember that these are people with voices and dreams and hopes.
The very first word that comes to mind is the one that came to mind for decades, which is shame. For me, it was a source of great shame that this happened to my brother. Over the years, and especially now, I don't really feel shame anymore. I actually, especially today, I'm extremely grateful. I'm just grateful for the work that was done by Geraldo Rivera, by the activist physicians and parents, and unfortunately, my family did not benefit from that. It was too late for us, but not too late for so many others.
When the doctors called me 50 years ago to tell me of this expose that needed airing on television, Jane Curtin's fine work at the Advance, to advance that story, of course I had no idea that 50 years later, 35 years after the closing of this terrible institution, we would be gathered here celebrating the progress, guarding against deterioration and budget cuts and so forth. But the world has changed for the developmentally disabled. They have come out of the shadows.
The ribbon cutting today of opening the mile is a formal action of remembering the past to protect the future. For now, it's about people walking on this mile, walking on this property, and starting to really critically think and take steps. And they can take personal actions to make sure that this never happens again. Be the change that you want to see.
That's exciting to me, to see what has been built on the ashes of that, the phoenix that has risen from those ashes. And that's the legacy.
Part 3. The following is the story of a murderer who began as a mentally ill man whose existence would dovetail with Willowbrook when he worked there as an orderly and continued living there after the institution was closed. Andre Rand was born Frank Rustum Ruchon on March 11th, 1944, in the Bronx. As if living in poverty in an indigent neighborhood wasn't hardship enough. His father died when he was 14 years old, and his mother's mental health unraveled shortly thereafter. She became so unwell, she was treated on an inpatient basis at the Pilgrim Psychiatric Center in Brentwood, Long Island. Young Andre was left to fend for himself as he was shuffled throughout the social service and foster care system, which cannot be relied upon to even provide a safe place to land, let alone a happy environment to live in. There are few records on file describing his behavior and general disposition at that time. One quote had it that he was detached, withdrawn, and unresponsive. Considering those descriptions, he was perceived as being practically comatose. Another authority figure noted that he spent inordinate amounts of time staring at other people. Another remark had it that he demonstrated a poor understanding of consequences. Trauma has a way of distorting a victim's reality since their life has become a stark contrast to what others are experiencing. At this point, Frank could neither count on safety or stability. So it should come as no surprise that he would stare longingly at those who had it, craving the same. Ultimately, he soon learned that invisibility would keep him safe, and it was a lesson that guided him in the years to come. When Frank Roshan was dispatched into adulthood at age 18, he lived a life of uncertainty. He worked odd jobs, he lived in rooms, but also in city parks. For the most part, he was a transient, seldom remaining in one place for long. A significant turning point occurred in 1966 when, using the assumed name Frank Bruchette, he was hired to work as a custodian and therapy aide at the Willowbrook State School in Staten Island. Having been a ward of the state, there had to be something about the conditions of the facility and the plight of its inhabitants that resonated with him. They were cast out of mainstream society not because of violating the legal and social contracts, but because they were mentally ill or developmentally disabled. The conditions they were left to rot in became infamous due to the widely broadcasting investigative report by Geraldo Rivera. The residents were often left in the nude and were not bathed. Other necessities were withheld or meted out in short supply. Frank understood this environment very well because he had a history with such places. Due to this, it wasn't long before he aligned himself successfully with Willowbrook. Someone more humane, say, someone like Geraldo Rivera, could barely process this place that was long on space but short on heart. But it was familiar territory to Frank. His colleagues remember him as being quiet and withdrawn, seldom encouraging conversations with little more than monosyllables. He was polite, but almost as if by rote, like he was a student of human interaction and witnessing it out in the wild, like how zoologists would do with chimpanzees in Uganda. He was remembered by his fascination with the patients, especially the children. Still, it wasn't something they could have reprimanded him for, and Willowbrook had bigger fish to fry. May 5th, 1969. Another pivotal moment in the life of Frank Rushan came when he was arrested in the South Bronx for the kidnapping and attempted rape of a 9-year-old girl. He lured her into his van with the promise of a ride home. She managed to flee before he could complete the attack. He was identified by witnesses. He was charged with attempted rape and kidnapping. He went with a guilty plea to the charge of sexual abuse and received a 4-year sentence. A psychiatric profile of Rushan described a man who was capable of rational behavior but was detached from consequence. Another report had him as being in possession of, quote, antisocial traits with possible psychotic features. He was incarcerated for 16 months, and once he was released, he changed his name to Andre Rand. It was a legal rebirth, but in all other respects, he was the same man, a drifter as always. He returned to Staten Island, where he worked odd jobs and had no fixed address. Now that Frank Rushan was erased as his identity, it was almost as if he were among the walking dead. He came across as having a bifurcated disposition, both pathetic and menacing. He was always staring, but seemed to be focused on something that was out of any spectator's sight. He often muttered to himself, talking about sin and purity amid quoting Bible verses. Needless to say, with this record of behavior, he didn't make many friends at the time. He pushed a shopping cart around with him that was filled with what appeared to be junk to outsiders. Outsiders also remembered that he would stop at locations inhabited with children. He would stop and stare at them as they played. This made parents very uneasy. He wasn't reported to the police for this behavior, but parents were quick to shoo their children away from wherever he stood. Much of Willowbrook was shut down, but there was enough room for him to squat in tunnels underneath and make them his temporary domicile. When he wasn't there, he was in his van. He spent a lot of time finding places to disappear. He collected bottles and accosted people on the street with his questions and observations regarding Christianity and children. It weirded people out, but Staten Island was never lacking when it came to eccentrics. When he talked about children, his voice grew quiet and tender. When talking about adults, he articulated himself with contempt. Observers recalled that he appeared to be in a dialogue with someone, whether alone or not. He came to regard the world at large as evil and endeavored to play the dual roles of savior and punisher. When he was at work, he would clean obsessively, even after his shift ended. He had a fixation on ridding the world of filth. He continued to occupy sections of Willowbrook that had not yet been shut down. When the institution was finally closed for good in 1987, he was able to claim it as his kingdom. Occasionally, he was reported by parents for staring at children, but the police were unable to charge him with anything, and they ultimately dismissed his behavior as among his eccentricities. He would use these encounters with the police to learn what not to do so that he could deflect attention from the police. He began giving children rides in his van again. For example, he would drive a child from the Bronx to the Newark airport as a, quote, good deed. These good deeds did not go unpunished. He served 10 months in jail for unlawful imprisonment. Once he was paroled, he disappeared once again. When questioned about his past, he would quote scripture and talk about purification and forgiveness. He saw significance in even the most mundane objects and events, kind of like how someone might think they saw the Virgin Mary in a blueberry muffin. He was offering children candy when he wasn't making people uncomfortable with sermons and fits of laughter. He was arrested several times for trespassing. He kept toys, candy, and other things in his van to draw children inside, as if using these items as bait. He learned how to approach citizens without being noticed. He did the same with children, learning how to approach them without making them uncomfortable. He was a self-taught game hunter. By then, Willowbrook was all but completely abandoned, except by squatters like Andre Rand. The institution was opened in 1947 with the best of intentions. It was to facilitate an environment where medicine, compassion, and humanity would converge. The problem was, there was a need for this institution whose immensity would prove to be Willowbrook's downfall. It was designed to house 4,000 patients, but between parents who couldn't cope with their children's disabilities and the state agencies that were at a loss to place wards with mental and/or physical disabilities, Willowbrook became a catch-all, and it was unable to provide quality care to all its charges. The result was that many of its residents lied naked in filth. Those who entered its doors at the time recalled a stench of urine, disinfectant, and the hormonal expression of despair. The staff were overworked, and as a result, many of the patients were neglected of quality care. Both adults and children suffered from this circumstance to the point that it became a moral outrage when it received attention from the media. Children reclined on cots or on the floor, many of them naked. Many Willowbrook patients screamed their throats raw. Others rocked back and forth endlessly. Administrators and politicians were long on excuses and short on solutions. Enter Andre Rand. He performed tasks the other staff would have avoided where possible. He cleaned floors, transported patients from one unit to another, and performed other menial tasks. It was really his first stable job, and he felt his outlook as an earthbound messiah would be of great help to these people who were languishing in squalor. Compassion fatigue had infected the rest of the staff like a plague, and there wasn't a nurse or doctor who showed any true kindness or concern. Suddenly, the Hippocratic oath was not a factor. In February 1972, Geraldo Rivera's expose of Willowbrook was aired on television, and for those who watched the broadcast, it was unsettling. Rivera received a tip from one of the few doctors who truly cared about the patients who suffered endlessly but could receive very little care from the physicians whose efforts were spread too thin to give them the attention they deserved. The documentary was worse than any horror movie. Children had arms like twigs due to malnutrition. There was feces smeared on the walls, floors, and the bodies of patients. Eyes were vacant. Some of the children were screaming. The facility was infested by rats who crawled along the baseboards. As if the visuals weren't disturbing enough, the crying and moaning provided a soundtrack that made it all unbearable. To this day, Rivera gets emotional as he describes what he encountered at Willowbrook. At the time, he was no less choked up. The moral failure that led to the institution's decay stirred up outrage across America. Citizens demanded answers and solutions from politicians. Those politicians finally launched inquiries. They faced tremendous pressure to reform the ways in which the vulnerable sector is treated. Sadly, little changed in the aftermath. Andre Rand was quoted as saying, "Outsiders don't understand what goes on here." Indeed, the neglect, the squalor, and other horrors were only symptomatic of order, which was something he appreciated. While outsiders found those conditions unacceptable, he was comforted by them. The rest of the staff didn't find the atmosphere and its methods of operation quite so comforting. Inspections occurred frequently, but in the wake of whatever improvements might have occurred, many employees quit after hearing about pending layoffs. Others remained for the pay, but were otherwise bitter and distant with patients. This resentment became rampant, and many nurses stopped reporting violations. If a supervisor didn't want to see a ward, they would avoid doing so. As Willowbrook was shut down, building by building, Rand took more and more refuge in the basement tunnels. He yearned for and enjoyed the isolation. He was especially present down there during inspections. In the abandoned buildings, he would occupy the empty spaces. He would claim the furniture that had been left uncollected. When asked by security what he was doing there, he would say he was, quote, helping out. Nobody questioned it. He had been a hoarder for a long time, and since nobody had bothered to clean the units, he was able to add to his collection of randomized objects. Throughout the years when the facility was populated, he learned to tune out the sounds and sights of suffering like the rest of the staff, and the callous he developed enabled him to be as cruel and unconcerned as so many of them were. Andre Rand became Willowbrook's last resident after its official closure in 1987. Still, he continued to walk along the roads of Staten Island looking for bottles. He was often heard muttering something about, quote, protecting the innocent. He would continue to draw attention from police for loitering, trespassing, and sleeping in abandoned properties. The officers viewed him as more of a nuisance than a legitimate threat. July 7th, 1972. Alice Pereira's mother allowed her and her older brother to go out and play in the afternoon. The courtyard was full of children playing. At one point, Alice's brother went back up to their apartment to use the bathroom. When he returned to the courtyard, Alice was gone. Her mother called her name from their apartment, but got no response from Alice. Soon their neighbors joined in, but they too got no such answer from Alice. As afternoon faded into night, the neighbors searched the entire complex. A missing persons report was filed with the police, who arrived at the scene. Most of the tips reported led to dead ends, but there was one that smacked of legitimacy with the police. Someone reported seeing a green Volkswagen van parked close to the building early in the afternoon. They described the driver as being a disheveled male with a gaunt face and a stringy hair. He wore a gray shirt. He was observed lingering near the fence, watching the children play. The police knew of a local man who owned a van of that description and who was also known for child abuse and endangerment. Andre Rand. Days later, he was brought in for questioning. He wasn't in Willowbrook when they found him. The detectives found him to be cooperative and polite. He insisted he knew nothing about Alice Pereira or her disappearance. He said he was so occupied with working odd jobs that day that he didn't have time to loiter at her apartment complex. He even let them search his van, but the items they found wouldn't even have been sold by a thrift store. Just clothes, ropes, cans, and garbage. There was no evidence linking him to the disappearance of Alice Pereira, so they were forced to release him. The citizens and police of Staten Island left no stone unturned in its pursuit of Alice Pereira, but the search yielded no results, and eventually it ended. Andre Rand was remembered by the residents of Alice's apartment complex for parking his van close to their building. The police brought him in for questioning once again. Though they found him to be odd, both in dialogue and disposition, there was nothing about his answers and his van that offered a break in the case, so they were forced to release him again. The case went cold, though one detective never forgot Andre Rand's responses to questioning. They described him as a man who wanted to be caught, but wasn't sure why. Another detective was disturbed by how detached Rand was while discussing the disappearance of a child. Eventually, Alice's mother and brother moved. Andre Rand continued to haunt Staten Island, collecting trash and loitering. He even stood or idled in his van close to the apartment complex where Alice Pereira lived, though nobody reported him to the police. He observed the patterns of people's lives, especially the children. It was important to him to learn who was most likely to end up alone and for how long and where. The denizens of Staten Island didn't want to deal with the memories and associations linked to the disappearance of the 5-year-old girl and the reputation of Willowbrook. Andre Rand had been written up for approaching children and offering them candy so many times that all the police could do was notify the parents that he was nothing but a mentally ill vagrant and harmless. He often stopped to speak to children. They remembered him as friendly but odd. He would tell them stories about ghosts in the woods, secret tunnels underneath the hospitals, and, as he characterized it, angels that lived in the dark. The kids would laugh, though this information did arouse some morbid curiosity, as they felt some fear digesting it all. The paper trail on Andre Rand continued to stretch beyond its original parameters. An elementary school teacher caught him speaking with children about taking them to see what he called the old hospital. As always, no arrest was made. He continued to talk to himself about cleansing the island. July 15th, 1981, 6:30 p.m. Holly Ann Hughes was outside playing when her mother asked her to go to the store to buy a bottle of dish soap. Holly dutifully took on this responsibility as she had before. She never returned. Police, neighbors, and volunteers combed the island looking for Holly. They didn't find her, but a few witnesses came forward with the best leads yet. Some saw Holly speaking to a man who was gaunt, with greasy hair and hollow eyes. He was seen in the neighborhood often, though no one paid much attention to him since he was one of many vagrants who frequented the island's streets. A priest recalled seeing a man sitting in an idling van. He recalled getting a bad feeling about him. He wasn't able to consciously recall many details, so he agreed to be hypnotized at the police station. He recalled a man fitting Andre Rand's description. That became abundantly clear to the police. His van was found, but he was not inside. Detectives searched for Andre Rand and found him walking along a road carrying a grocery bag. He smiled when they approached, as if having expected them, like they were his guests. They took him to the precinct for questioning. When asked about Holly Hughes, he said, "I don't know any Holly. I don't hunt kids. I help them." He gave as an alibi his collection of trash that evening. When the detectives told him about what the witnesses had seen, he said, "People see what they want to see." As always, he was released and disappeared. The priest was haunted by what he saw in Andre Rand's eyes. It wasn't rage I saw in him. It was emptiness. Like he was waiting for someone to tell him what to do next. He had become even more gaunt, more unkempt, and walked the streets and other areas barefoot. He muttered to himself scripture and his feelings that the children of the world needed to be saved from corruption. Andre Rand had gotten worse. Some said they heard him say he could only purify them through death. It was like The Catcher in the Rye, but with a more morbid conclusion. July 9th, 5:30 p.m., 1987. 12-year-old Jennifer Schweiger left her home in Bull's Head to go for a walk. She never returned. Jennifer had Down syndrome. She told her mother she was just going for a stroll around the block, something she had done many times before. With so many new citizens in Staten Island, the fear that so many parents had felt had subsided, and the curfews and vigilance had receded as aspects of everyday life became normalized. Now they could no longer assume that the children of Staten Island were safe, especially a child with an intellectual disability that would compromise her capacity for being streetwise. As with the disappearances of Alice Pereira and Holly Ann Hughes, mass panic set in. Volunteers throughout the community took to the woods and other areas to find Jennifer. The police dispatched helicopter pilots, divers, and canine units. Andre Rand was questioned but denied any knowledge of or involvement with Jennifer's disappearance. When asked if he lived in the tunnels of Willowbrook, he said, "There's nothing down there but ghosts." August 13th, 1987. Two searchers combing the grounds behind Willowbrook spotted something unusual. It was pale, and it wasn't made of stone. At first, they thought it was a doll. It was, indeed, of humanoid form. But they soon realized it was not a toy. They notified the police of their finding. What the two men found was a shallow grave. The body contained therein was confirmed to be the remains of Jennifer Schweiger. Hours later, Andre Rand was placed under arrest. The evidence was circumstantial since she was found where he made his home, but it was the best lead yet. Outrage and hysteria swept throughout the community as the media descended to document it all. Outside the courthouse, spectators displayed signs. Some were as benign as "Justice for Jennifer" and "Never Again." The signs directed at Andre Rand, not so much. The media summed up their feelings by dubbing him the Staten Island Boogeyman and the monster who had come home. As police interrogated Rand, he answered evasively with riddles. He denied having anything to do with Jennifer Schweiger's murder, but he copped to the accusation that he had been living in Willowbrook. He said, "I belong here. They left me behind." Before they found her body, he said things to the police like, "You think you can find her, but she's already found peace." When probed, he said, "I know these woods better than you ever will." Still, there was no evidence that Andre Rand had actually murdered Jennifer Schweiger, and the police were forced to let him go, an action that drew the ire of the community. It received a great deal of criticism from the media, with the Staten Island Advance referring to the initiative as a failure of justice born from bureaucracy. When Andre Rand was arrested again, he said to the officers with a smile, "I knew you'd be back." He was charged with kidnapping and murder of a child. He didn't ask for an attorney, and he didn't cry. He stared into space, devoid of expression. One of the detectives said, "It was like watching someone who'd already made peace with hell." At his trial, the jury deliberated for 5 days. He was found guilty of kidnapping in the first degree and murder of a child. He was sentenced to 25 years to life. When he was being led out of the building, a journalist asked him if there was anything he would like to say. He said, "They'll never find the others." Thank you for listening to Human Monsters. Bye for now.